Thank you for coming to this workshop to explore emotion regulation. I'm Shannon. I'm an FASD system navigator with Kids Inclusive, and I'm here today with Jen, a psychotherapist with our Kids Inclusive team. Today, we have a few learning outcomes. We want to gain some knowledge of the origins of emotion regulation and the effects of co regulation on the development of regulation skills in children and youth. And to start that, we're going to promote our own self care. So, we're going to take a moment to do a brief grounding exercise before taking in this new information today.
Hi, and welcome to Headspace. So, no matter what's going on in your life right now, no matter how many thoughts are racing around your mind, no matter how the body's feeling, just take a moment to sit down and take a big, deep breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. As you breathe in, a sense of taking in fresh air, the lungs expanding. As you breathe out, a sense of letting go of any stress in the body, in the mind, just feeling the muscles soften and relax. And close your eyes if you'd like to. One more. Breathing deeply in through the nose and out through the mouth. And just take a moment to pause. Allow the thoughts to come and go. And then just gently opening the eyes again.
We'll begin our workshop today identifying the areas of the brain responsible for emotion regulation. These areas are the neocortex, or also known as the thinking brain, the limbic system, also known as our emotion brain, and this part of our brain includes the amygdala, which is responsible for our emotions, our memory, our social interpretations, and functions as our survival center and our alarm system. Our hippocampus, which is responsible for forming our new memories, and our hypothalamus produces our hormones and manages mood, hunger, thirst, our blood pressure, and our body temperature. And finally, our reptilian brain. People sometimes refer to this as our dinosaur brain, and it's responsible for our instinctive behaviors, such as our fight, flight, or freeze, and our startle responses. It's important to keep in mind that our brain undergoes a rewiring process that's not complete until approximately 25 years of age. Our brains develop back to front, so starting with that dinosaur brain, then next comes our emotion brain, and that one tends to lead the way well into adolescence. And it sort of explains when we're thinking about toddlers and teenagers, how they often will come to every interaction from an emotion standpoint. Once that part of our brain is developed, our thinking brain starts to grow. And it sort of takes the longest. It takes roughly 20 years to be complete. This is all important to keep in mind as we're watching our kids grow and develop, and to keeping in mind that the brain is undergoing this rewiring process. It's growing, it's changing, and it's developing a little bit slower than we may have thought it would. And sometimes if we think to ourselves, such as our kids should be able to do this, or because they're this age, they should be able to do this, that might be an indicator that we have to step back and sort of look at their brain development, the development of emotion regulation in the brain, and that it takes 25 years to be complete.
Just to build on what Jen is talking about there in terms of social and emotional development, this is a visual to illustrate how growth occurs at different rates, much like our brains. We need to keep in mind that brains are unique and develop differently, and it's important to consider that growth and development can be impacted by many factors. Something to keep in mind during this presentation in relation to your own child, family member, or loved one is where they are developmentally. Sometimes these differences can present as being developmentally younger than one's chronological age. This is common in neurodiverse populations and can be referred to as dysmaturity. These developmental gaps or differences might exist in various areas. So it could be in terms of emotional maturity, social skills, living skills, expressive or receptive language. And I think it's just important to remember that we need to meet these kiddos where they're at and think stage, not age. So, what is emotion dysregulation? I think it's kind of important to start with what is emotion regulation. So basically, emotion regulation is the ability to effectively manage and respond to emotional experiences, which for many of us comes naturally and we're blind to it. Emotion dysregulation is also a response to emotions. This could be in relation to intense emotions or unpleasant emotions, anger, anxiety, sadness. These are all parts of the human experience. However, sometimes those feelings come too quickly, too often, or are too difficult to manage. When emotions are bigger than what a child can manage, the reactions might fall outside of expectations. To those around you or your child, the reactions seem out of proportion or inappropriate given the situation, and it might take a little bit longer to get back to baseline. So essentially, there's a reduced ability to respond to big emotions in a flexible way, which may be paired with a reduced ability to identify or recognize what the stress is and how to cope with it effectively. So it's important to note that we are attuned to dysregulation. We know when it's happening, but we tend to be blind to regulation. So, what are some of the causes of emotion dysregulation? We've got three different categories here. So the first one is physical. So some of the things that can be dysregulating might be hunger, thirst, a lack of sleep, illness, so being sick, whether or not you're recognizing that that might be the way your body is feeling. It could be pain, so being undersensitive to pain or oversensitive to pain, or struggling to identify pain. Uh, there could be nutrient deficiencies or a lack of exercise can also be a contributing factor here. So just not moving our body enough. Uh, in terms of sensory, it could be sensory overload. So, when the five senses take in more information than our brains can process. It could be sensory processing issues, so an impacted ability to effectively register, receive, organize, or respond to sensory input. It could be due to unmet sensory needs or external or internal sensory triggers. And then we've got emotional category. So that could be a trauma history, it could be stress or anxiety, it could be feeling unsafe or uncertain, or changes in routines or expectations. So it just might be too much to process when unexpected events or changes in the day occur. Uh, we also have excitement and anger. So these are big emotions that can sometimes feel the same in the body. And Jen will talk a little bit more about that later. And then connection needs. So I think it's important to keep in mind that all of these are often due to a poor fit between the environment or our expectations and the child's needs. I do like this slide a lot. So this is our neurodivergent umbrella or neurodiverse. It's a nice visual to illustrate that neurodivergence is a broad term to say that our brains are all unique. We all experience and interact with the world in different ways. And there are a variety of experiences that shape these interactions and impact the way our brains develop. This certainly isn't an exhaustive list, but it's important to know that trauma is one of the categories that falls under this umbrella. So, what is trauma? Trauma is the lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing event. Experiencing a traumatic event can harm a person's sense of safety, sense of self, and ability to regulate emotions and navigate relationships. The traditional view of trauma focuses on acute events, so abuse, violence, neglect, accident, or acts of war. What we need to remember is that trauma has lasting effects that live in our bodies, and neurodivergent brains may also have trauma impact via sensory trauma. So, as you can see here, living in a world that is so overwhelming and feels really unsafe from a sensory perspective, we often see this connected to school experiences where students' needs aren't met, perhaps resulting in isolation, exclusion, or academic challenges. And then we can also take a look at social trauma. So, that feeling of nobody really getting you or trying to fit in and not being able to figure it out. So, many kiddos who experience this engage in masking, so hiding their symptoms to their own cost, leading to exhaustion. And this is just in an effort to try and keep up or meet expectations and fit in.
One of the areas we talked about earlier was anxiety, and anxiety is a necessary emotion. It ensures we are safe from harm. We need anxiety to keep us alive. However, sometimes our brains have heightened sensitivity, and the feelings of anxiety happen when we're actually safe. Anxiety is generally experienced in the body, and we often experience psychosomatic symptoms such as upset tummies, sweating, increased heart rate. These body sensations are cues of a nervous system dysregulation. And these symptoms are often the ones our kids are trying to avoid. And that's what leads to that fight, flight, or freeze response, which we'll learn a little bit more about next.
What is the fight, flight, freeze response? Our survival is dependent upon self-protection mechanisms. The fight, flight, freeze response is the body's natural reaction to dangerous situations. Our primal instinct is to defend ourselves through fight, engaging in the conflict, flight, running away or leaving, or freeze, remaining as still and quiet as possible. When the amygdala, our body's center for emotional response, senses danger, it sets off alarms within the body and sends the body into survival mode. Sometimes the mind can misinterpret a situation, causing a false alarm. This is when there is no real danger, but the body's fight, flight, or freeze response has been activated, like when that startling snake turns out to be a hose, or the spider on your arm is simply a piece of lint. Fight, flight, or freeze is a biological response that can impact the entire body. Breathing becomes shallow and can cause hyperventilation. The heart starts to race, and many people experience tightness in their chest. While these symptoms can feel like a serious cardiac event, many times they can be relieved through mindfulness and breathing exercises. As the body prepares for action, blood flow is diverted to the major muscle groups and away from our digestive system. This is why you may feel an urgency to use the restroom in an anxious situation. Dry mouth, along with nausea or upset stomach, are common as well. Blood also rushes away from our extremities, leaving our hands cold but sweaty due to the body's attempt to remain cool. The body can begin to tremble and shake, leaving legs and hands feeling weak. During a fight, flight, or freeze response, our brains focus on the negative memories and experiences. This is likely in an effort to avoid danger and negative outcomes. The fight, flight, freeze response reduces our ability to recognize facial expressions. This can have a significantly negative impact on effective communication. Many people feel as though they may faint when their bodies are in fight, flight, freeze. However, fainting is typically caused by a dramatic drop in blood pressure. The fight, flight, freeze response actually increases the heart rate and blood pressure, making it nearly impossible to faint in these situations. Anxiety and stress impact the brain's ability to decipher false activations of the fight, flight, freeze response, causing them to become more frequent. Knowing the symptoms of false activations makes it easier to recognize and reduce their effects. There are exercises and coping skills to help reduce your body's false activations and restore its natural level of response.
Okay, so just before moving on, I just want to repeat some of the things that were said. So anxiety is our built-in alarm system, but often those who've had negative experiences in the past, they might experience frequent false alarms. When our children are experiencing anxiety without obvious threat, this can be really confusing for caregivers. It's just important to keep in mind that our child could be experiencing a false alarm. So even though there's no actual threat, they will still need some reassurance and support. Oftentimes, we want our children to move through these false alarms quickly. Be mindful of this as it can escalate the anxiety or inadvertently teach our children to ignore their own alarms in times when they are necessary. Safety and environments will reduce the false alarms, and we'll talk a little bit more about safety later.
This is a nice little visual to kind of show you what those fight, flight, or freeze responses can look like in our kiddos. So in terms of the fight response, this can look like yelling, screaming, using mean words, hitting, kicking, biting, throwing, punching. So all those kind of external, what we view as behaviors or symptoms. It could look like blaming or deflecting responsibility, being defensive, being demanding or attempting to gain control of a situation. Often it can be viewed as being oppositional or defiant or non-compliant. And I do like to just mention here that non-compliant is probably my least favorite word, and I'd like to replace that with non-competent. So kiddos don't have the ability in this moment to do what they're being asked to do. And they may also be moving towards what feels threatening. They could look irritable, angry, furious, offended, or aggressive. And then we have the flight stress response. So wanting to escape, running away, they may be unfocused, it may be difficult to pay attention, you might see some fidgeting or restlessness, or even some hyperactivity. It may be viewed as being preoccupied or busy with everything but the thing that they're supposed to be doing. Additionally, it could look like procrastinating or avoidant or ignoring the situation. These kiddos might move away from what feels threatening. They may look anxious, panicked, scared, worried, or overwhelmed. And then we have the freeze stress response. So this might look like shutting down, might feel like their mind goes blank. There could be an urge to hide, escape, or isolate themselves. They could be verbally unresponsive and say, I don't know a lot. Or they could have difficulty with completing a task. They could look zoned out, as if they're maybe daydreaming, or they could just be unable to move, like feeling stuck. They may freeze physically, but also just have a general sense of feeling stuck. And some of the emotions that are associated with this are depressed, feeling numb, bored, apathetic, or helpless. Sometimes it might seem like these responses come out of nowhere. They may be more, like Jen mentioned, internal cues or false alarms. And I think it's important for folks to realize that these responses likely won't always be expressed in the same way. And in addition to that, we need to remember that this is often a child's attempt at seeking safety. Okay, let's move on to alexithymia. So this is a difficulty in identifying, describing, and expressing emotions. And it affects 1 in 10 people, but over 50% of autistic people. So this is again, described as a difficulty in identifying and recognizing and describing emotions. Also, a difficulty in linking their own physical sensations to emotions. They may know if they feel good or bad, but not be able to identify specific emotions. So that finer continuum, like anxiety or feeling uncomfortable or scared or excited, may be too complex to identify. There may be a possible rigidity in terms of understanding emotions. So when you see someone crying, you assume that they are sad. When we know that you can cry because you're happy or joyous, you can cry because you're proud or frustrated. So there also may be some confusion in terms of emotions. So excitement and anxiety may get confused for these kiddos. And it can make it harder to recognize other people's emotions as well. So a good strategy is to consider using visuals of people's emotions in terms of a supportive strategy. Taking pictures of family members will also support kiddos in identifying emotions and those they love and see the most often. And then lastly, this can really cause increased anxiety from confusion and misinterpreting emotions. So imagine the stress related to social interactions at school for kiddos who just aren't understanding their peers' reactions and emotions. Just something to keep in mind.
So we're going to talk about the window of tolerance. This might be a new term or a term that you're familiar with. So the window of tolerance is the space in which we can manage intense emotions and stress. When we are within our window of tolerance, we're able to respond to the demands and the stress of everyday life without too much difficulty. It is our comfort zone in which we have the ability to self-soothe and self-regulate our emotional state. This visual provides a nice way of looking at it. The only thing I would remove or change are the words joy and happy from the middle, which is our window of tolerance. Because being within our window of tolerance isn't about being happy or joyful. It's about being able to cope with our incoming stress effectively. Our window of tolerance changes throughout the day and is expected to shift based on all sorts of different factors. Such as that feeling when we're running late to something important. The heightened state of emotion we feel is a good indicator of a small window of tolerance. There isn't much space to manage any additional stress, and we might get overwhelmed by little things during that period of time. But once we maybe arrive at our destination, maybe we even got there on time, we might feel more able to manage incoming stress. Little things will be easier for us to cope with, and we'll be able to stay within our window and stay in that sort of calm and collected state. In neurodivergent communities, some connect the concept of spoon theory. Worth a Google if you are interested to learn more. But a lot of neurodivergent communities will connect spoon theory and window of tolerance. And spoon theory is the idea that people start each day with a specific number of spoons or capacity for stress. And activities throughout the day use spoons, and the more spoons used, the less space for tolerating incoming stress. Spoon theory can be a really helpful concept to understand as a caregiver if you have a neurodivergent child or youth. We're going to watch a video about window of tolerance that explains it in a little bit of a different way. So this video shows us the window of tolerance in a different way and uses the sort of concept of a river. Okay, so today, later in our workshop, we will talk a little bit about strategies and suggestions on helping to build your child's emotion regulation skills. But one of the things that can be highly effective is starting to just look at increasing our window of tolerance. So we do know that neurodivergent brains often have a smaller window of tolerance in general. And so that incoming stress can be more difficult for them to manage for a variety of reasons. But today we're going to look at just some different ways to increase that window. So increase the space in which we can tolerate incoming stress. So if there's anything you take away today, spend some time maybe reflecting on your own experience, your own day-to-day life, and the day-to-day experience of your child, and see if in any of these areas there's room for improvement or expansion or change. So it can be a really impactful strategy to just look at building in some of these pieces, and we'll go through them one by one. So the first one is focus time. And so this is really deep focus on special interests or completing tasks we have on our to-do list. We all sort of can relate to how good it feels to be super focused on something that we're enjoying. The next one is sleep time. We do know that neurodivergent individuals can have some difficulty with sleep, either falling asleep or staying asleep, or just getting really good quality sleep can be really challenging. If you or your child are not sleeping well, this could be an area for intervention to look at different ways of building in more quality and longer periods of sleep. We do know that when we are better rested, that our window of tolerance is larger and we can manage more stress. Downtime. Everybody needs downtime every day. A time in our day without a lot of demands or a lot of expectations, where we can just sort of be focused on our own needs and letting our brains rest and our bodies rest as well. Physical, so moving our bodies helps expel excess cortisol and epinephrine. It's best to do it if you can get an increased heart rate, but if that's not possible, then even just looking at going for a walk or stretching, dancing in the kitchen, all sorts of different ways to move our bodies. And that can be really helpful to get all those excess hormones out of our muscles. Time in is a time where we can let our minds wander. It often happens when we're falling asleep. which can be problematic for anxious brains. So if you find that when you're falling asleep, you start to have lots of stressful thoughts or intrusive thoughts or difficulty turning your brain off, it might be helpful to make time for this at another time in the day. That can look like driving to your destination without music on, or just sitting with a cup of tea and just letting your brain kind of wander and go to the places it wants to think about. And connection time. So short periods of time each day where we're attuned to our children, and we have removed distractions and we're just sort of with them. Often I'll say you could combine connection time and time in together, and do just a quiet activity with your child. It could be laying in bed before they fall asleep. It could be going for a walk outside, just spending some time where there's not a lot of distractions and we can be sort of attuned to our children's needs. And the last one is playtime. So allowing ourselves and our children to play in whatever way feels the best. Adults need play too. And so just looking at building ways to be creative or doing activities that we enjoy, or just having some playful interactions with other people, laughter and those types of things. So just to reiterate, if there's any parts of your day-to-day or your week-to-week where parts of these are not available or not happening at a frequency that is helpful or supportive for you or your child, just looking at ways to expand each of these areas. And if we can do that, then we might be able to build a bigger window of tolerance, which means that we can cope with more stress than we currently are able to do.
Great. So just to build on that, this is the model of child engagement, and it does a really nice job of providing a visual to illustrate how relationships and feeling safe is an integral part of that window that Jen just talked about, and that this can ebb and flow based on experiences throughout the day, affecting our ability to regulate or stay inside our window. So feelings of safety or trust impact our ability to interact with our environment and the people in it. So when we're feeling safe, we're likely regulated, which allows us to take in information, learn and develop new skills, essentially participate in day-to-day expectations, and even take small risks. So if we're having a tough time with a kiddo, we need to remember that we need to regain that regulation to get back to any kind of meaningful participation. A great example of this is, our kiddos go to school and they have a teacher who's, built a buffer around our child. They're proactive. They provide accommodations. They meet them where they're at. And most days your child might be able to participate in class activities. And then a supply teacher comes in, and it takes a lot more to get your kiddo to a place where they're trusting or feeling safe, and feeling regulated. So class time can look a little bit different. So we just need to remember, again, based on this visual, is that if we're struggling with dysregulation, we need to get to a place where we are regulated before we can expect kiddos to participate in a meaningful way. So if we don't feel safe, we can't be regulated. So just a little bit more on safety. So when we're thinking about the concept of safety, it's common to think of physical safety, but there are also other considerations. So emotional or social safety, that's that feeling of attachment, having healthy relationships, being noticed, feeling like you belong, like you're included, all very important parts of our child's day. And then we also have sensory safety. So just when sensory input matches our ability to process and cope with it. So that's fancy way of saying like getting what we need. When those around our child can identify needs and be proactive in putting accommodations in place, it increases their success. So we do this for ourselves and our kiddos often without realizing it. So for example, a trip to the grocery store or a shopping center, you bring a snack, you bring a drink, you get a toy, maybe you have noise canceling earphones or music to listen to keep your kiddo busy and content. But we also need to make sure that we're doing this for ourselves. So this will ensure that we can co-regulate with our kiddo. So for me, when I go to the grocery store or to Walmart, especially in the winter around Christmas time, I know that I'm going to overheat. So I know, don't wear your coat inside, because if I'm overheating, my window of tolerance is smaller, and I'm not potentially going to be able to provide my kiddo with what they need. And a coffee always helps sometimes in that situation.
Okay, so interoception. This might be a new term or might be a term that you've heard before. And interoception is our ability to sense internal signals from our body, like hunger or thirst or when we need to use the washroom. For some neurodivergent brains, these signals can be hyper or hypo. So people with hyper awareness may have an increased sensitivity to the signals and be acutely aware of all of the body signals. You might see this in children who often complain about aches and pain or feeling tired. Others have a hypo awareness, and this one's a little bit more common, especially for neurodivergent brains. And the hypo awareness means you have a reduced sensitivity. So they may get the signals too late or not at all. And these kids sometimes have toilet accidents well beyond what's expected, or they might refuse food when offered and then shortly afterwards say that they're starving. And so when individuals have hypo or hyper awareness of body signals, they might have challenges meeting their basic needs. They might have more difficulty with emotion regulation. The ability to interpret our body signals is the first step to solving our problems. And so when we are feeling too hot, we might take off a layer. When we're feeling too cold, we might add a sweater. If we're feeling thirsty, it's a cue that we need a drink. If we start to feel, overheated, or our breathing is too fast, then we might do something to go and rest. We might take a break. Often we see this in kids who, it's super hot outside and they're running. They're covered in sweat. Their faces are red. They're clearly overheated, but they don't seem to be slowing down, and they need a lot of prompting and a lot of support to recognize those body cues and then meet their needs. You might find this with those kids who seem to be playing just fine, and then suddenly they're up and running towards the bathroom. Those might be kids who are getting those signals a little bit too late. I also hear this often when parents describe their kids as having a really high pain tolerance. That's usually a cue to me that maybe they might be experiencing some difficulty with interoception. And so some kids who seem to have a high pain tolerance, it might be that the pain cues or the tension that they're feeling comes a little bit too late, or it's not until the pain is highly intense before they recognize it. The reason that interoception is really important is because it's connected to our ability to manage our own body and our own emotional needs. And so co-regulation and interoception are deeply connected and integral to the development of emotion regulation. Interoception skills develop with the support of a regulated adult. So when children are experiencing that intense emotion or dysregulation, helping them identify their body cues and providing a label can help them make those connections between how their body feels and the emotion that they might be experiencing. So before we can expect a person to do that all on their own, we have to start with a co-regulation. And so we need to be able to help them identify those body sensations and those emotional needs and bridge that gap. And that's why this visual has that nice little bridge. It's showing that first we start with helping our kids do it by identifying and managing for them, and then that bridges to where they can do that independently. So if you're seeing that your child is having a little bit of difficulty recognizing those body cues, it could be an indication that the interoceptive awareness is still developing, so they still really need you to do that for them. They still really need you to identify and manage their own body and emotional needs. And that could be cueing them when to eat, cueing them to go to the bathroom. And it might be well beyond what you would expect given their developmental age. So relationship and co-regulation, they're interconnected. Parents and caregivers and teachers can have a really significant impact on supporting our regulation simply by modeling it. Emotions are often contagious, which is sort of a good example in this visual of what that might look like. So if we have, sort of a dysregulated adult, even if our child is within their window of tolerance, they're managing incoming stress, they might also become dysregulated because we're having a hard time. The same can be said sometimes if we have a really dysregulated child, then that can cause us to become dysregulated or overwhelmed by emotion as well. So just keeping in mind that those emotions are contagious and they can go back and forth. But in order for us to support our child in dysregulation, we have to focus on how are we going to stay within our window of tolerance, even though there's a lot of incoming stress. And sometimes that looks like adapting our environment, so changing where we are or changing the people that are in our environment. It could be adjusting sensory information that's happening in our environment. And all of those adaptations will contribute to our kids' sense of security. And that allows them that foundation for regulation. Maya Angelou is a poet and an author, and she once stated that people won't remember what you said and they won't remember what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. How you made them feel is co-regulation, and simply it means your nervous system meets my nervous system, and we can create a new one in between us. And we've all had this experience where we're having a really difficult time, we're feeling dysregulated, our emotions are high, we're well outside that window of tolerance. And somebody comes into our space in a regulated headspace, and they can help us come back down, problem solve, acknowledge and recognize what it is that we need, and then be able to reset our nervous system. And so oftentimes we're always looking for the strategy, the idea, the intervention, the way to manage our child's dysregulation. And so I just want you to keep in mind that sometimes it won't matter what strategy you used or what you said, but it will matter how you made them feel in that moment. Was your body calm? Was your voice calm? How did they experience you when they were having a problem? And so just keeping that in mind, that if we get caught up in strategies and interventions, sometimes that can interfere with our ability to be regulated in the moment. So just keeping that in mind when we're going into those situations, a calm body and a clear mind can be helpful. How do we do this though, when we're caregivers and we have limits and we have our own capacity for dysregulation, and we come into every day with a different state of mind, our own anxieties and our own stress? This can be a helpful activity to try. You don't need to do it in a formalized way like this. It could just be, a reflection, thinking about it, or just writing it down on a little piece of paper if that's helpful. And just really exploring for yourself, what does it look like? What environment am I in? Where am I when I feel the most regulated? Where am I when I feel the most dysregulated? Who am I with? What does it feel like in my body? How do I know that I'm in a dysregulated state? What sensations am I having that will help me cue into that earlier and earlier? And how does my body feel when I'm regulated? Some people say that when they're regulated, they feel sleepy. And so it can be helpful to know these things about yourself. And then finally, what is it that calms me? Who are the people? What are the items? What environments or what changes in my environment can I make that help me go to a state of calm? And once we're able to identify this, then it really helps us to be co-regulators in the moment, because it helps us identify what we need in the moment so that we can stay within our window of tolerance. So just an activity, it can be helpful to do with everybody in your household. So then we can start recognizing in other people what they need and what it might look like when they're feeling dysregulated. This is just a really simple visual of co-regulation. Visuals can be helpful for us in the moment when things are hard. Try posting it up in your home somewhere that you can see as a little gentle reminder of the importance of staying calm when our children are having really high or intense emotions. I used to have this in my kitchen when my kids were younger, and it really helped to cue me in when I started to feel dysregulated. what needs to happen, which is that when their storm meets our calm, co-regulation can occur. Because if we join them in the storm, it's going to get bigger and stronger and harder for us to manage in the end.
I do love that one. So here are a dozen ways to co-regulate with your child. So we can lower our body position or lower our voice tone. We can soften our facial expression, so being very aware of what you're presenting on the outside. We can model deep breathing exercises. We can do heavy work together. So this could look like moving and activating our muscles. I have a few clients whose kiddos really appreciate outdoor work. So piling wood is a really good activity that works well for them. Walking outside and paying attention to your surroundings. Could be just offering deep pressure. So that could be like a tight squeeze, like a big hug, or maybe it's a tickle on the back. Modeling a preferred sensory activity. So it's important to remember that sometimes that isn't setting a specific activity to do. That might be, we know that our kiddo likes Lego, and we just move over to a table and start doing Lego. So it creates some curiosity for that kiddo, so that it's like an open invitation for them to join. Moving our body together is another great one. Dancing or jogging or anything that works for you and your family. It could be dimming the lights, or it could just be let's stop talking. So I think this can be a really powerful strategy. It allows, especially neurodivergent brains, to process what's going on around them. So we know that when children and teens are dysregulated, their ability to use that higher order thinking is significantly impacted. So reducing language can be a really great strategy, as can changing your proximities. So sometimes we feel the need to be near our kiddos to support them, but sometimes they need space. So it might just look like, rather than sitting on their bed or in their bedroom with them, maybe you're just at the bedroom door and you're just there to offer, you're close, and if they need you, they know that they can ask for help, or you're just there. Sometimes we need to do that. But we also need to remember that we need to be regulated for these things to be effective. And so much like Jen mentioned in terms of the when their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. We also need to be super aware when that shark music happens that we might need to tap out and ask someone else in the house to do these things with our kiddos until we're in a spot where we can model that regulation again. So just to review, how do we co-regulate? By being warm and calm, being able to empathize, respond to the need versus reacting to the behavior. So again, that kind of goes back to there might be a traditional idea of how we should respond to a situation, but we need to respond to what our kiddo needs in that moment versus just dealing with the behavior. Modeling calm activities or behaviors, providing a structured environment that reduces uncertainty and provides feelings of safety. And when we can, we want to make changes to the environment. We want to remove triggers. We want to reduce sensory input. Essentially, we want to meet our kiddo where they're at. As discussed earlier, we want to think stage, not age. So if your teenager needs their stuffy or blanket and a big old hug, and that might not be what those around you are expecting based on their age, that's okay. And I think we need to get like super comfortable in responding to our kiddos in terms of what they need in that moment rather than what those around us are expecting. And that hopefully will assist in a mind shift in those around your child. Just some food for thought. This is kind of a helpful little slide. Sometimes we need some reminders when we're struggling to be regulated. So just, a reminder that we want to be with our child We want to stop and we want to notice what's going around them and around us. It's helpful if we support them in labeling their feelings and identifying the body sensations that you're seeing. So, if their face is red or their fists are balled up or, maybe they look tired, we want to help them identify that. So voice it and let them know what you're seeing. We want to create a safe environment and meet their basic needs. So are they hungry? Do they need a drink of water? We also want to get really comfortable with accepting the emotion. So letting our kiddos know that it's okay to feel angry, it's okay to feel sad, it's okay to feel disappointed, and letting them know that and acknowledging that you see that it's hard for them. So don't distract or attempt to suppress emotions. Just acknowledge them and validate them and give them permission. And, for some folks, there's a little card up in the top of this slide. You can write out those steps if you'd like, because, sometimes we need a visual as well. So what are some tools to try with our kiddos? There's tons of different options out there, but we've outlined a few on this slide. So I'll do my best to kind of go in order here, but in the top left corner, we've got some visuals. We know that visuals support reducing our language, and that can be really helpful for neurodivergent brains. So this one in particular is to support kiddos in identifying coping strategies at the early signs of dysregulation. This one specifically is when I'm frustrated, I can. So that would require a parent or adult to prompt or cue the kiddo to maybe look at the visuals and pick one that might be helpful when we're noticing those early signs. We've got some fidgets and some different tactile or sensory items. So there's some Theraputty there, some kinetic sand, some liquid timers or oil and water sensory bottles, which can be super calming. We've got some sour candies. So they can be super great for a grounding activity. And then we've got music. So there's a couple of different things that we can provide for our kiddos in terms of music. There is a thing called 8D music out there, and there's emerging information that neurodivergent brains respond really well to it. You need to use headphones for it, but essentially the sounds move from ear to ear, which can be really satisfying for neurodivergent brains. I have tried it out and I actually quite like it. It's a very different experience. Also, heavy bass can sometimes be really effective for neurodivergent brains. You can kind of feel it in your body. Whether or not the rest of the people in your household will tolerate that well, I'm uncertain, but something to try. Then we have like an emotions check-in visual here. What's great about this one here is there's a variety of different ways that you can use it. So as you can see, you could support your child in identifying their emotions from 1 to 5, or based on their facial expressions, or based on color. And what's really important to remember here is this requires consistent use, and it does require support. So a child isn't going to do this on their own until it's been practiced for a consistent amount of time, and then they may still need help every third day in doing that. And so just being okay with that. All of these items can be made at home. So the last thing we want people to think is that you need to go out and buy all of these crazy expensive products. The oil and sand timers can be made at home. There's a few different videos on Google that you can access that show you how to do that with like baby oil and sparkles or food coloring. Same with the visuals. They don't need to be laminated. They can just be, even an activity that you complete with your child. So I just want to make mention of that before I move on. And then we've got this lovely visual breathing diagram. You can use your fingers to trace it and use it as a visual guide, which can be very calming. Some of them can have a tactile element that supports that as well. There's a scratch pad there. This provides sensory feedback and distraction, can be really effective. And then, of course, physical activity or moving our bodies is always a tool that we should try to use. And then we've got an ice pack. So those instant ice packs, if you place them on your child's chest or the back of the neck, it helps to activate the nervous system. We've got a fancy tent here. So it's a blackout tent. Again, a blanket over a table would provide the same level of kind of sensory deprivation that your child might respond really well to. And then we have Headspace, which we did the video earlier, like at the outset of this presentation. It just offers a variety of different calming and meditation activities that are age appropriate. There have been some pairings in there with like favorite kids characters like Sesame Street and that kind of stuff. So it's just something to try out. That can be accessed online or YouTube, I believe. And then we've got Loop earbuds, which a number of people that I know have used and find effective in filtering out some of those external noises. There's different levels on some of them, and there's definitely an array of price points and different brand names, but those ones specifically are Loop. And then, just trying to incorporate our 5 senses into what we're doing with our kiddo can be super grounding. And then the last one here is a visual timer. So a lot of neurodivergent brains are time blind, really struggle to identify like how much time has elapsed or how much time it takes to do an activity. They may also really struggle with transitions, like say, for example, on the video games, like you have 5 minutes left, but like 5 minutes feels like 2 minutes or 1 minute. And so visual timers can be super helpful. You can just kind of watch the countdown of time, and it's something that they can refer to. You can also find timers that are similar to that on YouTube that are visual, and it could be like a countdown on Christmas lights, or some of them are, there's a variety. So just something to give a try. So those are some of the tools or strategies that could be used. And Jen, did you have any to add?
Nope.
No.
None to add.
Okay, perfect. And then we have our regulation or comfort box or toolkit. So this is an opportunity for you to take an array of the items that maybe some that we just talked about and other ones that you might want to add that are a little bit more personal to help a person feel safe and grounded during times of stress, anxiety, anger, and sadness. So it should include items to stimulate each of the 5 senses, which we talked about. So sight, touch, hearing, taste, and smell. And it's provided and supervised by a caregiver. It must be said that it might be helpful to even have more than one of these. So, you could have one in the car, you could have one at the grandparents' house or at daycare. And, essentially it's an opportunity when we see our kiddos struggling to provide them with some tools to maintain their regulation. We want to make sure that we're only using it to help our kiddo remain regulated because it can become a novelty and the effectiveness might wear off. Also important to know, or a word of caution, is that this tool should be associated with positivity. It is something that you can do with your child. So you could go and, make that with your kiddo, go to the dollar store and grab a few items, or, maybe these things are already in your home so that it's meaningful. And it's going to be most effective if it's used when your child is, maybe a 2 to a 4 on a scale of 1 to 5, rather than at a 5, which might result in some misuse, and it's not going to be as effective. But they're a great activity. And, you can put as little money into it or as much money as you want into it. And it can be super personalized to your kiddo. So very individual. Of note also is that, you can include activities in there if you'd like that you could do with your child. So it doesn't need to be independent. It can be something that incorporates you or someone you love as well. So in the picture here, it's got some bubbles. It's got, like a tactile sensory ball, some Welch's fruit snacks. You could put those sour candies in there as well, or maybe gum. It has some visuals also to kind of support that, reduction in language and help them identify how they're feeling. You could also incorporate maybe pictures of loved ones or a scented candle. The options are pretty limitless. Then we just have some suggestions on further reading that might be helpful. Some focus on autism, and there are a few in here that might focus on fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and then maybe some that are more specific to maybe interoception, which Jen talked about. We know that there's a lot of different reading material out there, but these ones are, they have good reviews from folks that we support. We want to thank you for taking the time to attend today, and we hope that you have a great day.